Kira. On a god-forsaken moon thousands of miles from home, Kira Anderton ran from the creatures she was sure were going to kill her. The bog tugged at each step, the weeds 1,000 tiny hands grabbing her legs, wanting her to fail, wanting to drag her down and make her a meal for the beasts that chased her. A shaking beam of light shining from the flashlight on her helmet pierced the mist, and 5 frantic beams from 5 other helmets told her the rest of her crew were not far behind. The bone-chilling squeals of the shadow demons blared like sirens, and the smell of mud and sweat filled her nostrils. A flash of white, followed by a clap of thunder. One of the other miners must have fired their lightning blaster. Dumb. Shooting them wouldn't stop them. Shooting them wouldn't slow them down, and turning to fire would only cause you to miss a step. She heard a scream, heard Bennett sink into the weeds, heard the clicking claws rip the flesh from his body. Nakano met the same fate a few paces later. And now, only 4 frenetic beams of light danced in the fog. Kira was struck with the realization that she was going to die for this awful job, on this awful moon, making awful people rich. Why did she leave her mother? Why did she leave Novena? She could see the moon she called home from here, a broken coin in the night sky, alone in the universe, half in light, half in shadow. Kira led the pack with John Clare not far behind. Elia Ramirez and Vladimir Hutch trailed them, the shadow demons rapidly closing the gap. The squat gray cruiser that brought them to this moon sat a few dozen meters ahead. Kira was thrilled to see that clunky chunk of metal, but that wasn't all she saw. In the distance to the left and the right, waves of convulsing weeds indicated more hidden creatures streaking toward them like torpedoes locked on target. Kira reached for a cylindrical device attached to her belt, her exorstick. She tapped a button on top of the device, and touch-sensitive holographic screens projected in front of her. She swatted away the first few screens to get to the one she needed. No easy task when running full speed. A few taps on the icons and the cruiser rumbled to life. Another tap and the double doors on the side of the craft slid open. A glimmer of hope. She heard Elia Ramirez arm her lightning blaster with a whir as the spinning coils generated a charge of static electricity. A lightning flash lit up the sky, followed by a screech. She hit one of the beasts, for whatever that was worth. A second later, Elia was dead, after one last useless attempt at heroics. Elia, Kira's friend, her confidant, her fellow woman in this world of men. And now she was gone. Kira swallowed her grief. She swallowed her pain. She ran. Kira, John, and Hutch closed in on the ship. The shadow demons closed in on them. The ones behind gaining fast, the ones to the sides blazing trails without haste. Kira heard a sound like a scythe slicing through crops, but she knew it was no scythe. It was a barbed tentacle swinging like a blade beneath the weeds. She heard Hutch howl in pain. She heard him fall and knew without looking the creature had sliced him below the knees. Another slice of the scythe that was no scythe, and Kira felt a thin razor of a barb nick her calf. Not deep enough to cut the tendon, but deep enough to make her yelp. "Kira!" John shouted, running almost alongside her now. "I'm fine," Kira called. "You're cut." "I'm fine." John Clare pulled his lightning blaster from its holster. He aimed it at Kira. "Kira, I'm sorry." "No, John, I'm fine." She'd seen him fire that weapon a dozen times and knew he had to now. Yet he hesitated. She braced for the hit but never broke stride. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something shoot from the weeds, something long and black and snake-like. It grabbed John Clare by the neck and yanked him into the shuddering vegetation. The beam of light from his helmet shot to the heavens and then went dark. Kira's ray of light sliced through the fog, a single beam dancing a lonely dance. She didn't know what to feel. She didn't deserve to die, not here, not like this. Did John? Yet she was glad he was dead. It was why she was alive. With that joy came guilt. She was a good person, right? Or had she been deluding herself all along? Alone in the universe, half in light, half in shadow. Then again, isn't everyone? She buried the guilt deep down. There was no time for that. She raced to the ship, heart punching her ribcage, legs trudging through the weeds, feet clinging to the muck, every footfall a gamble. The open doors were seconds away, but the shadow demons grew closer. Their screeching grew louder, squeals that made Kira think of a baby crying. She looked left and then right, the trails in the weeds fast upon her. Closer, closer. She held a finger over an icon on her holo screen. She had seconds. She dove through the open doors while tapping the icon, and they slammed shut behind her. Several thuds followed one after the other as the creatures pounded the ship a heartbeat later. She caught her breath to the unnerving sound of claws scraping the ship's hull. She collapsed in the airlock. With a tap on her exorstick screen, the inner doors opened, revealing a circular cabin lined with cubbyholes. Some filled with tools and equipment, and some empty, waiting for a haul of geodes that would never arrive. She limped into the cabin and tossed her helmet aside. The once cramped ship seemed spacious now. There was room for 8. But of course, there weren't 8. Not anymore. In the center of the room stood a ladder leading up to the cockpit. Up would become forward once the ship was in space, but now it looked odd. The backs of 5 chairs in a circle, all facing a concave glass ceiling. The chairs made a sort of 5-pronged star with the heads in the center. She didn't have time to get in the cockpit, nor did she have time for standard safety procedures. She had to pilot the ship by exorstick before the shadow demons tore through the hull. Her fingers flew across the holo screen's icons, and the ship quaked louder and louder until it blasted into the air, leaving the shrieking creatures stranded below, leaving the moon Chiral 1 behind. The G-forces dropped Kira to all fours, the rumbling of the ship pounding her ears. She crawled to a cubbyhole, unfastened a safety netting, pulled out a first aid bag, and tossed the bag toward the airlock. Flashes of red light flickered beyond the thick glass windshield as the thundering ship squeezed air into plasma. The skin on her face pulled taut as gravity deformed her usually round cherubic face. She looked at the cut on her calf. It was small, no more than a centimeter. But any cut from a shadow demon was too big. She reached into the first aid kit and pulled out a hypodermic needle, 3 large plastic bags of nutrient-dense saline, plus 1 filled with tranquilizer, and a glass vial filled with liquid painkiller. She drove the needle through the rubber stopper of the glass vial and filled the syringe, making damn sure not to miss a drop. She loaded the 4 plastic bags of saline and tranquilizer into an infusion pump, feeding into the needle. Her hand shook as she steadied the needle above a vein in her arm. It was much better to wait until she was out of the atmosphere when the ship was steady. But there was no time. It might already be too late. She drove the needle into her vein, and the solution rushed her bloodstream. The saline would keep her alive for a few days. The tranquilizer and painkiller would keep her in a near coma. She hoped. She thrust her injured leg into the airlock, sliding her knee across the threshold. She grabbed a rubber tube from the bag and tightened it around her thigh, hoping the painkillers would kick in fast. She tapped her exorstick and scrolled through the holo screens until she reached the ship's settings. She found the icon marked Airlock Inner Doors and slid the safety to off. She centered her leg between the sliding doors, knee completely over the threshold. She steadied her finger over the icon marked Closed Doors. She took a deep breath. She shut her eyes. She tapped the icon. The doors blasted shut, and with a crunching of bone and a splattering of blood, the powerful steel doors severed her leg clean from her body. Kira screamed louder than the deafening rumble of the ship. And then, silence. The ship escaped the atmosphere, and beyond the windshield stood the icy cold blackness of space. The ship veered, and Kira and the first aid bag left the cabin floor, spheres of blood drifting free from her leg floating in random orbits. G-forces relinquished, her angelic face returned. She floated weightless for a moment, until the ship accelerated into its new course, and everything crashed to the floor. The tourniquet slowed the bleeding, but not enough. She grabbed a cauterizing can from the bag while a puddle formed beneath her. She sprayed her wound. White foam bubbled and turned pink, reeking of antiseptic. She was proud of herself for not going into shock. If she had, she would have bled out, and they would have found her dead on the floor with her severed leg in the airlock, raising a million questions, but answering none. She lost a lot of blood, but she would survive. At least, she would survive the amputation. She looked through the door's window into the airlock and saw the leg that used to be hers. She tapped an icon on her hollow screen, and the outer doors of the airlock flew open. The air blasted into space, taking the leg with it, the moisture turning to a brief puff of white like a breath in winter. The last thing Kira saw before she passed out was her leg floating end over end into the void. Sophie. Sophie Song landed her air carriage on the edge of the tawny desert. The massive desert straddled the equator and comprised the central third of Ionia, the largest, most powerful country on the moon Novena. She rose from the cockpit, running a hand down to the geode that sat on a holster peg below her right hip. Just a habit. She was always double-checking that it was there, though she seldom went anywhere without it. Ionian knights rarely ventured far from their geodes. She wore her geode slung lower than most knights, quicker to draw that way. Her pants, one leg black, one leg purple, brought out the color of the amethyst in her geode. On her shirt above her heart was the pin of the Ionian Knight. The pin, the size of a thumbnail, consisted of a pattern of interlocking curves, a hyperbola within a truncated oval, representing the cross-section of the geode. She had the same symbol tattooed on her neck below her right ear. Sophie opened the side hatch, stepped into the wrath of the desert, and crossed the cracked ground, making her way to a nearby tent, a makeshift mission headquarters. The setting sun painted the western horizon pink, and through the dotted clouds above, the ringed planet Chiral dominated the sky, looming like a beacon. This world, the one Sophie and a few billion others called home, was the 9th moon of the gas giant Chiral. The founders named the moon Novena after an ancient form of prayer. Fitting. Novena had turned out to be the answer to many prayers. When it was discovered, the worlds that humans inhabited were running low on resources. Novena was the only one of Chiral's moons hospitable enough for humans to flourish, although the tawny desert was a poor example of Novena's abundance. The desert was barren, and even at twilight this desolate place was so hot it had a stench. Sophie opened the tent's flap to find her mission partner Cal Turnbow sitting on a folding chair with his feet up on another. There was a table loaded with snacks and drinks and a small AC unit spewing chilled air.
"Pastries, Sophie,"
he said, stuffing his face. Pastries? she repeated. You gotta be kidding me.
You're pissed about pastries?
I'm pissed I got an assignment babysitting bureaucrats. It seems every company in Ionia is owned by one of 6 families. Reps for 4 of them are on this flight.
Wait a minute. You're saying the government favors rich people?
Ha ha, Turnbow. You're getting sarcasm all over your sticky bun. I know how the world works, but I thought the entire purpose of the Land Relocation Agency was to ensure fair distribution of land during the seasonal migration.
Sophie, the LRA does what it has to do. They make sure the agricultural sector gets the most fertile land, the mining sector gets dibs on the natural resources, and that residential areas have the services they need. But after all that, of course the rich companies are going to have their way. Don't get upset. When you're my age, you'll be thrilled to have a gig where you can go home and sleep in your own bed. Not likely. She saw what happened to Ionian knights once they lost their edge, and she was not going to lose hers. She graduated from the academy 10 years ago, but she knew her best days were in front of her. Turnbow was 10 years older, and to him, this was a job, nothing more. Pastries and air-conditioned tents had turned his skills and his midsection soft. There was a commotion behind them as a group of people entered the tent. Leading the charge was a well-dressed woman followed by 4 men in suits. They were blathering about things Sophie didn't bother to commit to long-term memory. Money, business deals, and profit margins. The woman stopped in her tracks the moment she saw Sophie. You must be Sophie Song, she said, extending a hand. I'm Renette Imari. It's so nice to meet you. Sophie shook her hand. Nice to meet you too, Renette. Sophie sized her up. Perfectly coiffed hair, neatly manicured nails, and an expensive, well-accessorized outfit that was not at all appropriate for the desert. 2 types of people went into government, the kind who wanted to serve and the kind who wanted to be close to money and power. Sophie pegged Renette as the latter. Real live stem shifters, Renette?
Asked one of the suits. Not just stem shifters. Ionian knights, Renette said, with the gushing enthusiasm of a party hostess. Sophie hated to admit it, but she was glad Renette corrected him. Stem shifters alter space, time, energy, and matter with their minds. But Ionian Knights were an elite organization of stem shifters who'd taken an oath to serve the Ionian Republic. After years of rigorous training, Sophie felt she'd earned the distinction.
Impressive, said the man in the suit. Greg LaFalls.
He extended his hand to Sophie and she shook it.
I work for the Tsar Company. I'm sure you hear this every day of your life, but you have the most beautiful eyes. The way they taper, they're almost cat-like. And that color, what would you call them? Onyx?
Brown, Sophie said, letting go of his hand. I'd call them brown because they're brown.
I've never seen a geode up close.
He reached for it. He fucking reached for her geode. Her hand flew to his wrist and twisted it in a manner that let him know that if she wanted to, she could snap his elbow. I don't care who you are or who you work for, you never touch an Ionian Knight's geode. She released him.
Oh, this one bites,
he said with a laugh to the other suits. Renette went into panic mode. Mustn't upset the suits. Miss Song, I'm sure he had no idea the etiquette involved. It's okay, Sophie said. It was a misunderstanding. She was being diplomatic. The truth was, she wanted to conjure an energy blade and slice him in 2. It's just, regular people like us never see actual Ionian Knights, Renette said. Sure, we've seen stem shifting on exorstick videos, but never in real life.
How's this?
The voice came from Turnbow. The others turned to see him draw his geode from its holster peg. The stone, or more accurately, the mineral composite, was egg-shaped, almost twice the size of his fist, and pale on the outside with tiny flecks of blue that caught the light. A hole went through the geode from pole to pole like a tunnel. It was 1 centimeter in diameter at the core, but wider at both ends, creating 2 funnel-shaped openings at opposite sides of the geode. The inside of the geode was a swirl of crystals, various shades of green malachite mixed with quartz in Turnbow's case, although every geode was distinct. The one thing all geodes had in common was a lattice of iridium weaving through the crystals. Turnbow held the geode like a sword. He concentrated, and a swirl of smoky red light, a substance somewhere between energy and matter, formed in the hole in the geode. The red light spun into a vortex and extended out from the geode's concave opening. It stretched about a meter, forming a red blade that crackled and hissed. Sophie watched as Turnbow delighted the easily amused business class with an energy sword. He made it bend and twist to his will, bathing the tent in a red-orange glow. He was all too happy to demean himself for their enjoyment. Sophie wondered if he'd tap dance for them if they flashed him their bank statements. Turnbow let the sword dissipate. Sophie had to suppress the urge to roll her eyes as he segued into the next lesson from STEM Shifter Basic class. He conjured a thin blue tendril of light from his geode, an electrokinesis ray. The blue beam snaked its way to the table, clutched one of the pastries, and lifted it into the air with the buzzing of static electricity. Turnbow floated the pastry across the room with the bending, twisting finger of blue light. He let it hover near the ceiling of the tent for a moment. He dissolved the blue beam, dropping the pastry from its perch. While it was in free fall, he fired up an energy sword and sliced the tumbling dessert in 2. Renette and the suits cheered as the scorched pastry halves hit the ground. Turnbow holstered his geode, and Renette and the suits flocked to him. Sophie smirked, annoyed that he'd used his gift to impress strangers with parlor tricks. They boarded the government air carriage as Turnbow glad-handed with his new friends. It was a large vehicle with 5 rows of seats and an aisle down the middle. The sides were mostly glass, meant for optimum visibility. A pilot sat in the cockpit. Sophie sat 2 rows behind him in one of the passenger seats, and the others filled out the rest of the vehicle toward the back. She heard LaFalce talking to Turnbow.
Not that I don't love having you, but be honest, do we actually need Ionian Knights to do a flyby over the desert? Not really, Turnbow said. The most we'll run into is a desert rat or 2. You know, squatters who try to stake a claim in the desert before developers move in. Usually they're hoping for a payoff, but most of the time we just remove them. It's possible we might see some drug runners scavenging hellflowers. They use the flowers to make Stygian. They're usually armed, but they don't want trouble from us, so if they saw us, they'd run. Still, there's always a chance they might do something if they felt cornered. I doubt I'll have to use my geode, but it's good I'm here just in case.
While Turnbow basked in the role of grizzled veteran, Renette reprimanded the pilot for not having the AC blasting in the cabin before they boarded. She stepped to the back of the craft, wiping sweat from her brow. "Okay," she said. "We're almost off. My apologies for the slow start on the AC, but if you think it's hot now, keep in mind a few weeks ago this trip wouldn't have been possible. The desert will get cooler and cooler as the weeks go by. Then one glorious day, the rains will start and it will be as if someone flipped a switch. The temperature will plummet and the super bloom will begin. Seeds that lay dormant for generations beneath the parched soil will spring into action."
Novena tilted away from the sun at an angle steeper than ideal, and it took 104 standard years to orbit the sun. Exaggerated axial tilt and a long orbit caused drastic seasons, each lasting about 26 standard years apiece. That meant the entire world needed to follow the thin band of livability as it moved up and down the globe. Cities on Novena rose and fell at the whim of the ever-changing climate. Sophie thought back to the last seasonal migration. She was just a kid. Lots of memories came pouring back, most of them bad. "Okay, everyone," Renette said. "Take out your Exer sticks and hit acquire." The businessmen pulled out their Exer sticks, illuminated their home screens, hit the acquire icon, and Renette beamed them a program. A view screen appeared in front of each of their Exer sticks. Hold the view screens up to the windows and you'll see projections of how the Tawny Desert will look a few months from now. The men did as Renette instructed, and in their view screens they saw a verdant landscape with beautiful vegetation, flowing streams, and elegant structures of glass and steel. The image was directly over what was now a barren, rocky site. As they turned the screens, the picture changed, giving them a panoramic view of how the land would be developed. Renette gave a signal to the pilot, and the ship took off, floating over the desert to provide a spectacular aerial view. Renette went into her pitch. "What you see in your screens is based on climatologist predictions as well as records of what the Tawny Desert was like the last time it drifted out of relative equinox. The architecture you see, well, that's still to be determined, but you might recognize some familiar names. Buildings with the names Czar, Maloof, DeLongpre, and Blythe stood out in the skyline, bringing smiles to the men in suits. As the north falls into shadow and the land becomes unlivable, people will need a place to live," Renette continued. "Sure, they can move to the southern hemisphere if they like gloomy skies and rain, and sure, they can move to the island of Rythe, but let's face it, Rythe is Rythe." The men snickered. Rythe was always a punching bag for hip city dwellers. "You know as well as I, the Tawny Desert will become the greenest, most valuable land available." Renette and the men talked, discussing what would be built where. Sophie listened as the men mentally split up the pie, each claiming what was theirs. This pissed her off. Out of all the seasonal migrations, this was the worst scenario. Ionia has more land in the northern hemisphere by far. This shift will cause the country to lose more land than any other transition, putting limits on everything from housing to food production. It didn't sound like any of these well-connected passengers had austerity measures on their minds. Sophie settled in, getting lost in the hum of the engines, soaking in the view of the vast desert zipping by below her window. She took a moment to enjoy the calm. That calm was shattered by a thunderous, ear-splitting boom. The airship came to an abrupt halt, and everything in the cabin shot forward with enormous force. Sophie's hand flew to her geode, and she generated an energy shield without removing the geode from its holster peg. The shield kept her safe while the seats around her twisted and crumbled. Passengers smashed into the seat backs in front of them, some flipping over the top. A man who'd been lingering in the aisle flew forward and smashed headfirst into what used to be the cockpit. It had been folded like an accordion into a contorted lump of metal. Somewhere in the middle of that garbage compactor was what remained of the pilot. Sophie knew they hadn't been hit by an energy blast or artillery. They'd flown into something solid. The windows were cracked and jagged, the metal hull gnarled and serrated, and broken pieces of metal flew around the cabin like projectiles. As the air carriage fell, Sophie's training kicked in. She drew her geode and blasted an expanding shockwave into the ceiling, ripping a large portion of the roof away. "Turnbow!" She scanned for him. Shit. Turnbow was frozen. "I need you with me," she shouted, hoping the order would get him back in gear. "I'll get these two, you get those two." She gestured to the man who had hurled headfirst into the cockpit. "It's too late for this one in the pilot." Turnbow nodded, but Sophie wasn't sure he was all there. No time. She holstered her geode long enough to grab a hyperventilating Renette. "I need you to piggyback me." She wrapped Renette's arms around her, one over her left shoulder, one under her right shoulder, and made sure Renette clutched her own wrists. With Renette's hands pressed against her sternum, Sophie grabbed Greg LaFalce, who was so dazed she had to turn him around so his back was to her. She pulled a retractable cord from her belt, swung it around LaFalce, then around Renette, and fastened it to a latch on her belt. She wrapped her left arm around his torso. She pulled him in tight, locking Renette's hands between her chest and LaFalce's back. She drew her geode with her right hand, aimed downward, and fired a propulsion blast of red sparks, turning the geode into a handheld jet, propelling her and the others out of the plummeting craft. She flew them from the falling wreckage, landing about 100 meters from where the ship was about to crash. She let go of LaFalce, unfastened the cord, and turned to look back. She breathed in relief when she saw a cluster of 3 bodies being eased down by a red propulsion blast. Turnbow had gotten it together. The air carriage crashed on the dusty ground, and Turnbow landed the others a few meters from the crash. Renette fell to the ground, hysterical. LaFalce was mumbling something about losing his exor-stick. Sophie tried to process what had happened. They hit something. In an uninhabited desert thousands of meters high, their ship flew into something solid that none of the scanners picked up. Sophie was looking toward Turnbow and the others when her eyes caught something they couldn't comprehend. It appeared as though a window opened up behind them. She saw a grounded vehicle and a building, or at least part of a building. 6 figures strode out of the window. She had trouble focusing on them because they wore color-changing armor. The window behind them closed. That's when she knew. It was no window. It was a hole. A hole in an energy dome that covered most of the tawny desert. This made no sense. Stem shifters could generate shields, but nothing this big. Some stem shifters could bend light, but not around an area this large. And this energy dome was also invisible to electronics, or surely the pilot would have noticed something. "Get down, stay down, don't make a sound," Sophie ordered Renette and LaFalce. They did as she commanded. Renette was still whimpering. LaFalce was silent. Sophie held her geode and bent the light around her, turning herself invisible. She sprinted to Turnbow and the others. She watched in horror as the 6 armored figures generated energy blades. They were stem shifters. Not Ionian knights, but stem shifters for sure. "Generate a shield," she willed Turnbow. "Protect the civilians." Instead, to her dismay, Turnbow generated an energy blade. One of the armored stem shifters stepped up to Turnbow, and each took a defensive stance with their swords. Another stem shifter fired a pair of red energy blasts into the civilians' skulls, and just like that, they were gone. Sophie ran as fast as her legs would carry her. She was invisible for now, but once she conjured a blade or blast, her cloak would lift. Under normal circumstances, she'd get into position to take out 3 enemies before she revealed herself. But their armor was an unknown variable, so she needed to get close to them. She ran up to the stem shifter fighting Turnbow, placed her geode right up to the base of his helmet, fired an energy blast. At that range, the blast took off his head. This was a cue for Turnbow to act. He didn't. She had exposed herself, but she still managed to conjure a blade and sink it into another stem shifter's armor before anyone could react. She generated another invisibility shield and circled, but the others were on high alert. "We've got a light bender!" one of them shouted before using his geode to blast puffs of air into the dusty ground. A flurry of dirt lifted, and Sophie knew light bending would be rendered useless once the cloud reached her. She avoided the dust storm long enough to sneak up behind another stem shifter and fire an energy blast into the back of her head. She hoped Turnbow would use the distraction to his advantage. Instead, he froze yet again, and his career came to an end with a blade through the heart. Sophie shook it off and moved into a defensive position, wielding her energy sword. There was too much dust in the air to go invisible again. One of the shifters kept firing air blasts into the dirt to keep the debris stirring. The other two held energy swords at the ready. "Sophie Song," said one of the stem shifters. His helmet unfurled into his body armor, revealing a man with blonde hair and a square jaw. "You don't remember me, do you?" She didn't. "My name's Roger Acto. I was at the academy around the same time as you. It's okay if you don't remember me. You didn't mingle with the riffraff who couldn't help your career, as I recall. And now, you're my messenger. Tell your boss, Oksana Espinosa, the Ionian Knights don't have to worry about the Tawny Desert anymore. This land is no longer part of the Ionian Republic. It now falls under the jurisdiction of Antoine Colicchio." She knew that name. Antoine Colicchio was a notorious Stygian dealer. How does a drug dealer claim jurisdiction over anything? "We have soldiers, we have camo warriors." He gestured to his color-changing armor. "We have tech that'll blow your mind. And Colicchio has the assets to bankroll whatever we need." The sound of an energy blast cut him off. Sophie turned to see that one of the other camo warriors had fired at LaFalce, hitting him squarely in the forehead. LaFalce had gotten up and started walking their way. The idiot. As his body hit the ground, Renette screamed. "There's another!" Acto launched himself to Renette on a red propulsion blast. Sophie fired a shockwave at the other two stem shifters, knocking them to the ground. She turned and shot an energy blast at Acto. He was too far away for it to pierce his armor, but it sent him reeling. She aimed her geode and launched herself through the air like a rocket. She reached Renette and generated an energy shield over the two of them. Energy blasts came fast from the other stem shifters, but they died with a thud on her shield. Acto and the others arrived quickly by using propulsion blasts. "Wow, you're fast," Acto said. "Sophie, it only takes one of you to deliver a message. So go. Let us have her." Sophie said nothing but kept the shield buzzing. "You gotta be kidding me," Acto smirked. "You're not gonna risk dying for this government whore, are you? If you're thinking I'll let the two of you go just because you've got my message, you're wrong. Another ship will be by soon enough. It'll crash into our energy dome, and if there are any survivors, one of them can deliver the message instead." Sophie still said nothing. "Wow, you take your oath to protect seriously, don't you?" While Acto talked, Sophie surveyed her surroundings. There wasn't much, just a few rock formations in the distance. Sophie hunched over Renette with her left arm wrapped around her torso and her right hand holding the geode high. She kept moving, in part to make the others think she might attack, although she couldn't because it would leave Renette unguarded. Still, best to keep them guessing. The shifters kept moving as well. They were circling her, two with blades glowing bright and one spewing puffs of dust into the air. The cloud of dust grew thick, then dissipated. Thick, then dissipated. She made sure her geode was always pointed at one of them, making them believe she could fire a blast at any moment. She kept moving her feet, still holding a hunched-over Renette. She circled until a rock formation was behind her,
and the 3 armored stem shifters were bunched together. She waited for a swelling of dust. She fired a propulsion blast to launch herself and Renette to the rock formation, setting the cloud of dust swirling. The moment they were airborne, she bent the light around them, making them invisible. Between the element of surprise, the tornado of dust, and turning invisible, none of the shifters could land a shot on them. The second Sophie dipped out of the enemy soldier's view, she relinquished the blanket of invisibility and used a propulsion blast to cushion their landing behind the rock formation. They were on solid ground for a heartbeat before Sophie repeated the routine, launching them over a second rock formation, turning them invisible immediately after launch. The armored shifters didn't see the second launch, so they had no idea which direction Sophie had gone. Sophie collapsed on the desert ground and caught her breath. Renette did the same. They were deep in the desert without their air carriage. Sophie would have to fly Renette out with her geode once the others gave up their search. She hoped it wouldn't be long. She was tired and thirsty, and the heat was sapping what little energy she had left. It took about 40 minutes for the armored shifters to retreat to their protective dome. The sun had set and the desert was cooling, but not nearly enough. Sophie held Renette and flew them as far as she was able, falling short by a few hundred meters, too exhausted to fly anymore. They walked the rest of the way. Part of her wanted to make Renette carry her for a change, but she doubted Renette could carry anything heavier than a purse. They made it to the tent, exhausted but alive, and fell to their knees by the concession table. They each downed a day's supply of water in a matter of minutes. If Sophie never had to set foot in a desert again, that would be fine by her. Dante Czar reached both oven-mitted hands into the oven, pulled out the bread and cheese casserole, and rested it on the stovetop, sending the aroma of melted cheese wafting through the apartment. "Dinner!" His daughter, Garima, lit a candle on the end table in the living room, but she wasn't setting the scene for dinner. 12 lit candles were placed strategically around the room in a circle. Some on the tables, some on the shelves, and some on the floor. "Almost done," she called. Dante had learned that "almost done" from Garima was teenage girl speak for "I'll be 20 minutes." Garima stepped into the center of the room, the midpoint of all the flickering candles. She started a timer on her Xer stick, then pulled out her geode. The timer buzzed. Garima spun and fired a blast of air at the candle directly behind her, snuffing out the flame. Another quick turn, another burst of air, another candle extinguished. She fired 12 blasts of air, one for each candle. She stopped the timer. 12 hits, 8.5 seconds. Not good enough. Dante thought maybe that was the end. But instead, Garima flicked her lighter and set about lighting the candles once more. "How about you take a break and eat?" "I need to train. I have no idea when I'm going back to the academy. And I could have cooked for myself, Dad. I'm an adult." 19 is not an adult. It feels adult, but it's not adult. Come on. Your mom's gonna be late, so you might as well start. I made your favorite. Bread and cheese casserole. He felt bad that bread and cheese were all they had to offer her, but it was what it was. He would have loved to serve his daughter meat or fish, but that would require discussing money with his wife. He hated those conversations. They didn't have much. The cramped quarters, a 2-bedroom apartment with the kitchen, living room, and dining room, all one not-so-large room, was in a hexagonal stack. 6-sided steel compartments piled one on top of another, independent but identical, so that each unit could be airlifted when the time for relocation came. They were on a lower level, but around here, far from the capital city, there was no view, even from the top floors. Only weeds and other hexagonal stacks cluttered the landscape. "Why did you cook, if you're having dinner with Grandpa Nico?" She lit the 12th candle. "Just 'cause I'm not eating here doesn't mean I can't help Mom out." "Or you're buttering her up because she thought your father was out of your lives forever and she'll be pissed that he's not." The timer buzzed and she began firing air blasts once more. Dante shook his head. "You're too smart for your own good." Dante hopped into his air carriage and set it on auto. The closer he got to downtown Ionia, the bigger and brighter the buildings grew. Gone were the multi-unit prefabricated stacks of gray steel and weed-ridden lots. Structures with red tile roofs, marble domes, and twisted spires of glass and steel came into view. Rooftop gardens added swatches of green, and cantilevered swimming pools jutting out from balconies defied gravity. Between these modern behemoths lay perfectly manicured walking paths, artificial lakes, golf courses, and even more swimming pools. Some rooftops doubled as landing platforms, while others served as electronic billboards cycling through advertisements aimed at the flying air carriages above. The frenetic skyline was in constant motion, full of colors, noises, and life. As permanent as this city looked, it was all built to move. Too big for tow rigs, these buildings had built-in engines. The people here led far different lives than he did. Dante doubted any of them had to find new and creative ways to serve their families bread and cheese. A giant tower appeared in the distance, dwarfing all those around it. This palace in the clouds was home to one man, Nico Czar. Dante's air carriage hovered down to the landing strip where a team of servants met him. An armed guard walked him down a tiled marble corridor adorned with works of art. Dante had no idea why his father had extended this dinner invitation. He had no idea why he had made an effort to reconnect with him at all. 2 stem shifters flanked the double doors to the dining room. The doors opened, and there stood Dante's father. Nico wore a crisp tailored suit and sported a silver beard trimmed neat. He smiled at his son and wrapped his arms around him. "Dante, so glad you could make it." "Of course, Dad. It's good to see you. It's been a while." It had been over 20 years since their falling out. They hadn't seen much of each other over those years, mostly family events Dante felt obligated to attend, even if he didn't always feel welcome. The truth was, if it wasn't for Dante's sister Clarice, he probably would have seen even less of Nico and his other siblings. The others he could live without, but he'd never turn his back on Clarice. "I hope you're hungry." Nico gestured to a long table. Servants removed silver covers from at least a dozen platters of food. Some sizzled and let loose clouds of smoke that billowed to the ceiling. Glass decanters filled with various liquors, each a different color, formed a rainbow of decadence. "All this is for you and me?" asked Dante. "I didn't know what you were into these days, so I told them to bring everything." Dante felt guilty that his wife and daughter were home eating bread and cheese as the scent of exotic spices flooded his nostrils. And he couldn't help but feel a little suspicious. "I think we can take it from here." Nico gestured to the door, and the servers picked up the cue. Nico walked over to the 2 stem shifters. Dante noticed they didn't wear the pin of the Ionian Knights, which meant they were hired guns. Bodyguards. One was a tall, lanky man with sunken eyes and dark frizzy hair that stood 6 inches high. But it was the other one that Nico approached, a woman probably less than 30 standard years. She looked athletic and tough and wore an expression that screamed, "Don't fuck with me." Nico put his hand on her waist and spoke in a familiar way. A little too familiar, Dante felt. So he averted his gaze. Lyria, I want to speak to my son privately. Don't be offended when I ask you and Everett to wait outside."
"Of course not, Nico," Lyria said. Dante heard Nico kiss her on the cheek before she and the other stem shifter exited to the hallway, leaving Nico and Dante alone. Nico walked back to the table.
"How's your daughter?" "She's good. On break from the academy."
Nico said.
"I didn't think they got breaks." "Sometimes they do."
Dante didn't elaborate. Nico beamed the smile of a happy grandfather.
"You know how proud I was when I heard. A knight in the family." "Who knows? Maybe someday she'll work for you." "Never. Ionian knights are honorable. My stem shifters like Lyria and Everett are nothing more than rent-a-thugs. Garima deserves better."
Nico tapped his exorstick and fiddled with the touchscreens. Dante heard a rumbling and felt the floor jolt as the entire level of the skyscraper lurched and started rotating counterclockwise.
"Let's do this right, and enjoy the sunset while we still can,"
Nico said. As the floor turned, Dante watched the city roll by through an entire wall of windows, until the setting sun slid into view, causing shadows to scurry across the floor. The sun's beams danced in the spiraling trails of smoke coming from the trays of food.
"Soon the sun will set after lunch. Couldn't our ancestors have found a place where we didn't have to move every couple of years? It was hard enough for them to find a world with a breathable atmosphere and compatible gravity. Not to mention 25-hour days are pretty close to our circadian rhythm,"
Dante said.
"Why not a world that didn't, I don't know, spin so fast?" "It's the exaggerated axial tilt that does it."
This drew a blank stare from Nico. Dante changed the subject. He knew demonstrating his intellect made his father feel threatened, and his father did not like to feel threatened.
"People are used to moving."
Nico reached for the steaks and doled out meat to both of their plates as he talked.
"Things are different this time. Your generation, you've only known the band of livability to move but expand. Now it's not only moving, it's shrinking. The moon is, what do you science types say? Falling out of relative equinox." "Right. And we'll have to make do with less. Less livable land. Fewer resources. This is what it was like when I was young. And believe me, people who are used to having will have a tough time going without. This Antoine Colicchio and what he did in the Tawny Desert. He's trouble." "Colicchio's a drug dealer. Nothing more,"
Dante said.
"It doesn't matter how a man made his money if he's smart enough to use it to buy power. Colicchio used his money to buy brains, guns, and stem shifters."
Nico tapped his exorstick and several news feeds projected holographic screens all around him. Almost all of them were reporting on the Tawny Desert.
"These news channels, I own almost half of them. And trust me, these reports are sugarcoating it. I have a few stem shifters as security, hired guns who wanted to make more cash than the Ionian Knights could pay them. But what Colicchio did is different. Ballsy, even. He found Ionian Knights willing to flip sides and work against other Ionian Knights. He's got a cloaking system we can't crack."
Something on one of the news feeds caught Nico's eye. He laughed.
"Then you get this idiot. He doesn't even have the sense to realize his story is no longer relevant. Have you heard about this nut Killian Scuro?" "I saw the headlines, but I haven't been following." He's been holding these political rallies. He wants Mount Summit to secede from the Ionian Republic, and thousands of idiots lined up to hear his bullshit. Those special election laws are just put on the books to make people feel in control. You're not supposed to act on them. Politics or not, what are you going to do after you secede? When your land falls into shadow, you're done. Ionia ain't giving your people new tracts of land if they secede. Congratulations, asshole, Nico shouted at the politician on the screen. Enjoy your newfound freedom as your dick turns to ice.
Nico dished out a portion of squid to his plate, then poured himself more whiskey.
Killian Scarrow is a nobody. But Colicchio, that son of a bitch is gonna cause a lot of pain. Things were going to be tricky enough with the relocation, but with him holding the Tawny Desert, everything comes into question. I'm not talking about my business. I'm talking about the safety of every citizen of Ionia.
Nico glanced at Dante and smirked.
I know me caring may come as a surprise. People like to paint me as some robber baron draining blood from babies, but still, all profits aside, I don't want to see Ionia lose a big chunk of land to this guy.
Was it possible the stories Dante had heard about Nico were exaggerated? Maybe he was just a businessman after all.
He won't get away with it, Dante said. Ionia has an army and Ionian knights. They'll mop him up and the seasonal migration will happen like every generation. He won't go down without a fight. War is coming. And during that war, I will be assassinated and your brother Angel will drive the company into the ground.
Dante was shocked by what his father said, and by how cavalier he was when saying it.
You're paranoid. It's not paranoia if it's already happened. What? The Ionian Knights have someone called an Eden, Nico explained. An Eden can bring back glimpses from the future. I'm fortunate enough to be privy to information the Eden gleaned. Information that did not come cheap. In every future the Eden glimpsed, I will be assassinated and Angel will cause the company to crash and burn.
Dante had heard of an Eden, though it seemed too bizarre to be true. Almost like a story the government circulates to keep other countries afraid of making a move against them. But this piece of information left him dumbstruck.
But those are glimpses of a possible future, Nico continued. The future can be rewritten. So when I heard I would be assassinated, I took action. I moved. I changed my security team, my protocols. Still, the Eden saw me dead. I changed it all again. Still, the Eden saw me dead. To change what seems inevitable, I've got to do something drastic. Something I never thought of doing. And that's why you're here.
Now we're getting to it, Dante thought. I knew he had a motive.
Dante, I want you to come work with me and be my right hand. You'll learn everything, every detail, every secret. You'll use your book smarts to advise me. Perhaps the changes we make will prevent my assassination. And if not, when I'm gone, you'll be my successor.
Dante was shocked.
Me? Up until now, it's always been Angel. Under normal circumstances, an angry bull like him would keep everybody in line because he's too crazy to get a read on. What we're coming up against takes nuance and diplomacy, traits he's sorely lacking. But
Dante tried to interject.
Your sisters? Yale is less stable than your brother, and Clarice...
Nico didn't need to say another word about Clarice.
You've always been the smart one, Dante. I know you're not perfect. You've had your history. But that's over now.
Dante bowed his head, old shame always near the surface. Nico placed his hand on Dante's chin, lifted his face, and looked straight into his eyes.
That's over now. Correct?
Dante nodded.
Good.
Nico dropped his hand.
It has to be you, and it has to be now. Bringing you in might be the change I need to prevent what has been seen. Dad, I appreciate this, but running a company this size, this isn't me. This isn't the you became, but it's the you should have been. You had potential, Dante, real potential. But you threw it away because of one stupid decision. Don't make another. Parents can't have favorites.
He paused as he sipped a bit of whiskey.
But we do. Which is why, when you went through your phase, I was disappointed.
His eyes bore into Dante's.
I expected that shit from Angel, not you. I'm offering you not only power and wealth, I'm offering you a chance for redemption.
And with those words, however harsh, came the approval Dante had waited for his whole life.
Dad, Don't decide tonight. Go home, sleep on it, talk it over with your wife. She'll try to talk you out of it. Don't let her.
Dante was about to defend his wife, but Nico cut him off before he could speak.
I know she hates me. A lot of people hate me. People who aren't rich want someone to blame, and blaming me is easier than blaming themselves. But do this for me. When she tries to talk you out of becoming rich and powerful, ask yourself why. Why doesn't she want you to reach your potential?
That took him aback. Could Nico be right about Jananiah holding him back? Maybe people like his wife hated Nico because of their own shortcomings. They needed a boogeyman, and Nico filled that role. And if there was a grain of truth to the stories about how Nico did business, Dante could change things. Make things better. For everyone.